Sam Sulek is 24 years old. Before bodybuilding, he was a collegiate diver, an athlete who spent his teenage years competing on springboards, not training in weight rooms. That background makes what followed unusual. He earned an IFBB Pro card at an age when most competitors are still developing, drew comparisons to established professionals, and trained at Gold's Gym in Venice alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger. His name has become one of the most discussed in fitness over the past 2 years. What is less commonly covered is the depth of his interest in the sport's history. Sulek grew up studying bodybuilding's earlier decades, the documentary footage, the training philosophy, the interviews with figures from the 1970s and 1980s. His familiarity with the sport goes well beyond his own competitive career. When Sulek named his 6 favorite bodybuilders, the list reflected that background. It offers some explanation for his training approach, his aesthetics, and his apparent orientation toward the sport at this stage of his career. First up, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger. No figure did more to establish bodybuilding as a mainstream sport than Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Sulek places him near the top of his list. Schwarzenegger won 7 Mr. Olympia titles. He arrived in the United States from Austria with a physique that drew immediate attention and competed during the 1970s, the decade in which bodybuilding moved from a niche pursuit to one capable of filling arenas and sustaining major publications. The 1977 documentary Pumping Iron brought the sport to a broad general audience. Schwarzenegger subsequently built a career in film, served as governor of California, and became one of the most recognizable public figures of the late 20th century. What Sam Sulek sees in Arnold isn't just the accolades, it's the approach. Arnold trained with a volume and frequency that most people would consider borderline reckless. Twice a day at certain points, 2 to 3 hours per session. He treated bodybuilding less like a fitness plan and more like a discipline that demanded total commitment, something you showed up for every day and poured yourself into completely. That philosophy aligns closely with how Sam approaches his own training. Sam has spoken publicly about the importance of consistency above almost everything else. Get there, do the work, come back tomorrow. In 2025, Sam Sulek, who grew up in Delaware, Ohio watching Arnold footage online, flew to Los Angeles and trained at Gold's Gym Venice, the same gym where Arnold built his reputation decades earlier. The two ran through a back workout together, lat pull-downs, pullovers, rows. Arnold coached him, telling him it wasn't about going as heavy as possible, but about going all out and giving the muscle everything it needed. On the way out, they ran into Ronnie Coleman. Sam described the experience as absolutely surreal. That encounter also connects to a more complicated chapter of Arnold's legacy, one that didn't just affect a single competition, but ended a career, broke a man, and left a lasting mark on the sport. It involves the next name on Sam's list, Mike Mentzer. Mike Mentzer is one of the most fascinating and intellectually complex figures in bodybuilding history. The fact that he appears on Sam Sulek's list is notable, because Sam doesn't actually agree with Mentzer's most well-known ideas. He admires him regardless, a distinction that says something about how Sam thinks. Mentzer was born in 1951 in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and began lifting at 12 years old. By his late teens, he was developing not just muscle, but a genuine intellectual framework around training. While most bodybuilders of his era trained by feel and tradition, Mentzer was reading philosophy, studying Ayn Rand, and constructing an argument for why the standard high-volume approach to bodybuilding was not just inefficient, but logically flawed. He called his system heavy-duty. The core premise was stark: one working set per exercise, taken to absolute failure, with extended recovery periods between sessions. Not the 4-days-a-week schedule Arnold followed. Mentzer believed once a week was often sufficient, sometimes less. In his view, the body grew during rest, not during training itself. The workout was the stimulus, the trigger. Overtraining, he argued, was the single biggest mistake bodybuilders made. The results he built on that system were difficult to dispute. At the 1978 Mr. Universe, Mentzer became the first competitor in the contest's history to receive a perfect score from every judge, a unanimous 300. That had never happened before, and it has not happened since. His physique at that contest was considered by many to be the closest the sport had seen to a perfect build. In 1979, at the Mr. Olympia heavyweight class, Mentzer delivered what most historians of the sport regard as a performance that should have won the overall title outright. He won the heavyweight division convincingly. Frank Zane took the overall, but the bodybuilding world recognized that Mentzer was the clear frontrunner heading into 1980. Then 1980 arrived, and the situation unraveled. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had officially retired from competition in 1975 after winning his 6th Olympia, announced at the last minute that he was returning. He had been filming Conan the Barbarian, and by most accounts was not in the condition he had maintained during his peak years. Multiple competitors at that contest later said Arnold came in underprepared. The judges awarded him the title regardless, his 7th Mr. Olympia. Mentzer placed 5th. The man who had received a perfect score at Mr. Universe, who had dominated the 1979 heavyweight class, finished 5th. He was publicly furious, saying he believed the contest had been corrupted by Arnold's celebrity and that the judging had been fraudulent. He never competed professionally again. His competitive career ended not because his body had failed him, but because he believed the sport's governing system had. The consequences extended well beyond the competition. Mentzer became increasingly isolated in the years that followed. He lost close people in his life. His mental health deteriorated significantly. In June 2001, he died at 49. His brother Ray died 2 days later. The sport lost 2 men in the same week. His ideas, however, did not disappear. If anything, they gained influence after his death. The internet rediscovered Mentzer in the 2010s, and interest intensified sharply in the 2020s, with wide online discussion of heavy-duty training, the one-set-to-failure protocol, and extended recovery schedules. Sam Sulek grew up in that environment and clearly engaged with it seriously. And yet Sam doesn't adopt Mentzer's approach. He has said publicly that while he holds Mentzer in high regard, training once or twice a week with 4 days of recovery between sessions doesn't work for him. In Sam's framework, consistency is foundational. Frequency is how the body learns and adapts. His training philosophy draws more from Arnold's emphasis on volume and Dorian Yates' emphasis on intensity than from Mentzer's model of maximum rest. Mentzer appears on Sam's list for a different reason. Sam recognizes in him a man who thought independently, challenged established practice, built an intellectual case for his beliefs, and maintained those positions even when the broader establishment pushed back. That kind of principled independence, doing things your way because you genuinely believe they're right, not because they're popular, is something Sam Sulek reflects in his own approach to training and content. Mentzer was in several respects ahead of his time. He's on the list because serious thinking deserves recognition, even when the conclusions it arrives at aren't the ones you draw yourself. Next up, we have Ronnie Coleman. Ronnie Dean Coleman was born on May 13, 1964 in Monroe, Louisiana. He grew up without much, played football at Grambling State University, and after graduating joined the Arlington, Texas Police Department. Bodybuilding came later, and initially without much fanfare. Brian Dobson gave him a free gym membership at Metroflex Gym in exchange for representing the facility, and Coleman began competing. He was disciplined and consistent, but for several years he finished outside the top rankings without breaking through as a dominant presence. What is less widely known is the role Kevin Levrone played in Coleman's development. Levrone was among the most decorated bodybuilders of the 1990s and one of the most successful competitors never to win the Mr. Olympia. The two men competed at the same Grand Prix events during that period, and Coleman, frustrated by his inability to close the gap, went to Levrone's room the night before a competition and told him he couldn't understand how Levrone kept winning despite comparable effort. Levrone shared wine and pizza with him and told him to stop being obsessive to let himself breathe. Coleman competed differently the following day. He was sharp and focused in a way that hadn't been visible before. The shift held. In 1998, he won his first Mr. Olympia title. He won again in 99, 2000, and 2001, and continued winning through 2005, 8 consecutive titles in total, tying Lee Haney's all-time record. The training that produced those results was extreme by any standard. Coleman regularly squatted 800 pounds for multiple repetitions at Metroflex Gym, a stripped-down facility in Arlington with none of the equipment or atmosphere associated with elite athletic training. He deadlifted and pressed weights that placed him among the strongest competitive bodybuilders on record. The footage from those sessions, which is widely available, remains a reference point for the outer limits of training load in the sport. The physical cost became apparent after his retirement. Coleman underwent 13 surgeries, including multiple spinal procedures and bilateral hip replacements. At certain points, he required assistance to walk. He has spoken publicly about living with constant severe pain. The physical capacity that defined his career had been significantly diminished by the demands that built it. Despite this, Coleman remained active. He founded a supplement company, continued traveling for appearances and fan interactions, and maintained a public presence without expressing self-pity. His reputation within the sport has remained strong, not only because of his competitive record, but because of how he conducted himself after it ended. Sam Sulek trains with heavy loads. His approach to resistance and volume has drawn public concern from established coaches and veteran bodybuilders, who have warned him about the risks of his methods. He has acknowledged those concerns and made adjustments, but has continued training in the same general direction. The parallel to Coleman's mentality, sustained intensity in the face of professional caution, is a consistent thread in how Sulek approaches the sport. Coleman's competitive dominance ran through the late 1990s and into the following decade. During that same period, another figure had already reshaped what a Mr. Olympia physique could look like. A competitor who operated with unusual privacy, and whose influence on the sport's direction was considerable. He is the next name on Sulek's list. Next up, Dorian Yates, the shadow who changed everything. Before Dorian Yates arrived at the Mr. Olympia, bodybuilding had a recognizable aesthetic. The sport's champions were large, but they were also proportionate, even graceful. Arnold Schwarzenegger was symmetrical. Frank Zane was refined. Lee Haney, the 8-time champion who preceded Yates, had a physique that was imposing but polished. The sport in that era was physically extreme without being visually overwhelming. Dorian Yates changed that. Bodybuilding after his tenure looked fundamentally different from bodybuilding before it. At the 1992 Mr. Olympia, the audience's response to his appearance on stage was one of genuine shock. Yates was not simply larger than his competitors, he was larger than anyone had previously appeared on an Olympia stage. The mass he carried was on a scale the contest had not seen before. His training philosophy was documented in a series of videos called Blood and Guts, which became among the most widely watched and discussed material in bodybuilding history. The approach drew heavily from Mike Mentzer's heavy-duty principles, high intensity, training to failure, low volume, but was applied with a severity that went further than Mentzer had described. Yates trained for 45 minutes to an hour. Each muscle group was worked with a level of concentrated effort that required several days of recovery. One working set per exercise, but that set was taken to absolute failure, and then beyond it, Sam Sulek has said directly that it was Machiavelli motivation videos on YouTube that first introduced him to both Dorian Yates and Tom Platz. Those videos, music-driven compilations assembled from archival bodybuilding footage, were the primary exposure point for a generation of young lifters encountering the sport's earlier era. Sulek watched them extensively during his development as a lifter. Yates, given the severity of his methods and the scale of his physique, clearly made a lasting impression. What further distinguishes Yates' career is what he did as his body began to break down, because it did repeatedly and in serious ways. In '94, he tore his bicep during the Olympia and continued competing. He won. In '96, he tore his tricep in the lead-up to the contest. He competed and won. In '97, he tore his left lat muscle so severely that completing his posing routine required exceptional physical will. He won that contest as well, giving him 6 consecutive titles. He then retired. He left the sport on his own terms, before injury could force the decision. That kind of discipline, the willingness to walk away from a dominant position while still at the top, is uncommon in competitive sport. Yates entered the Mr. Olympia on his terms, and he left it the same way. Finally, we have Tom Platz, a different kind of figure in bodybuilding history. There are competitors who win Mr. Olympia and earn their place in the record books. And then there is Tom Platz, who never won Mr. Olympia and is remembered by virtually everyone who has encountered the sport. He is 70 years old now. His last competitive appearance was in the late 1980s. And when photos of his legs circulate online today, the reaction is consistently the same: disbelief. Among serious observers of the sport, the question of whether Tom Platz had the greatest legs in bodybuilding history is not treated as a debate. It is treated as a given. What remains worth examining is how he got there. Thomas Stephen Platz was born on June 26, 1955, in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. At 9 years old, he saw a photo of bodybuilder Dave Draper on the cover of a magazine at a drugstore and decided that day that this was what he wanted to do with his life. He went home and told his father, who supported the decision. From that point, Platz organized his life around that goal. By 15, he was training seriously. In his early 20s, he relocated to Venice, California with $50 and walked into Gold's Gym, the same facility where Arnold Schwarzenegger trained, and where Sam Sulek would later train alongside Arnold decades later. Platz arrived in 1977 and began competing immediately. That same year, he won his class at the Mr. Universe. His leg development at that stage was already exceptional. Over the following years, it would become something the sport had not seen before. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Platz trained legs with a frequency and intensity that elite professional bodybuilders, competitors operating at the highest level of the sport, described as extraordinary. His squat sessions were not ordinary training. Other athletes would stop and watch. Visitors to Gold's Gym came specifically hoping to see him train legs. The things he did under the bar existed outside the range of what most athletes would attempt or even consider. At his competitive peak, he reportedly squatted 635 pounds for 15 repetitions. He squatted 350 pounds for 52 consecutive repetitions. In what remains the most documented single feat of lower body endurance in bodybuilding history, he loaded 225 pounds on the bar and squatted continuously without stopping, without racking the weight, for 10 minutes. More than 100 repetitions, with 225 pounds on the bar. In 1992, 5 years after his retirement from competition, Platz entered a squat competition in Essen, Germany against powerlifter Fred Hatfield, known as Dr. Squat, who held an official competitive squat of 855 pounds. The contest was structured in 2 phases, a single maximum lift, and a set with 525 pounds for maximum repetitions. Hatfield squatted 855 pounds in the max single, Platz squatted 765. When the bar was loaded to 525 for repetitions, Platz completed 23, Hatfield completed 11. A man 5 years removed from competitive bodybuilding without the preparation of an active competitor outperformed one of the strongest squatters in the sport's history on a test of lower body endurance. The explanation is straightforward, and it is one that Sam Sulek has understood clearly. Platz did not simply train his legs, he had a long-term, deeply held commitment to the squat as a foundational movement. He did not treat it as one exercise in a broader program. He treated it as the central exercise, the one around which a bodybuilder's identity in the gym should be built. At his peak, his thighs measured over 30 inches in circumference. For reference, 30 inches is the waist measurement of many adult men. Platz competed at the Mr. Olympia from 1979 through 1986. His highest finish was third place in 1981, notable, given what he was presenting on stage. His inability to win the title came down to proportionality. His lower body was developed so far beyond any reasonable standard that his upper body, while objectively impressive, appeared undersized by comparison. Judges could not set aside the symmetry gap. The competitor with the most recognized legs in the sport's history, who trained with greater consistency and intensity than nearly anyone in his era, never won its most prestigious title. Sam Sulek is 24 years old. He holds an IFBB Pro card, has built a following of millions across multiple platforms, and has already trained with Arnold Schwarzenegger at Gold's Gym Venice. He has appeared on the same stages where Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler have been honored guests. A first professional competition has been planned, and he is weighing carefully what his pro debut looks like, and whether classic physique is his long-term division or the starting point of something larger. The 6 men on his list are not historical footnotes or motivational reference points. They represent a documented pattern that the combination of extreme dedication, physical intensity, intellectual engagement with the craft, and an unwillingness to compromise has produced some of the most accomplished athletes the sport has seen. Arnold demonstrated that bodybuilding could function as an art form, that a physique could be constructed with the same deliberateness applied to sculpture. Ronnie Coleman showed that physical suffering is not a sufficient reason to stop, and that the athletes who reached the highest levels often did so at considerable personal cost. Mentzer showed that being correct and being recognized are not always the same outcome, and that holding an intellectual position the sport does not reward still has value. Jay Cutler showed that losing a title is not necessarily permanent, that it is possible to fall from the top of the sport and return to it. Dorian Yates showed that training intensity, applied at its furthest limit, produces results that are not accessible to those unwilling to reach that point. And Platz showed that what endures in the sport is not a trophy count, but the kind of commitment that people still study and reference decades after the fact. 6 athletes, 6 distinct careers, each one a variation on the same underlying principle, that greatness is the product of sustained commitment rather than innate advantage. That the distance between a competitive physique and a legendary one is not determined by genetics, chemistry, or timing, but by the degree to which an athlete is willing to pursue the goal.